Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
Pete, I'm an alcoholic. And thanks for your sharing. It was good. I liked it. Made me feel good. I almost didn't make it here tonight. I've got my days mixed up because I'm not used to having 4 days off. And the only reason I didn't go out of town this weekend was because I was supposed to speak tonight. But at 5 after 7, I was at the laundromat at Venice and McLaughlin, and I had everything. I just taken everything out of the washer, and I had 7 dryers full of all the clothes because I do my laundry every month, whether I need to or not. And anyway, I was talking to this lady, and I said, I always come here on Friday night, but I couldn't this week because I have somewhere to go. And she said, oh, it is Friday night. So it's the funniest thing. I had only put the clothes in the dryers maybe 1 minute before, so they were all still very wet. And I just pulled them all out, and I went running out to my truck back and forth. My whole back of my truck was full of my wet clothes outside. And I got home at 7:15, and I went running. By the time I got into the living room, I was already naked, and I didn't get to take a shower or shave or anything. And then I got here, and I was all confused, and I was running around. I went to the Elks Club and said, isn't the women's club around here? And they were like all drunk and rude. And they were like, what do you want to go to the women's club for? So I'm sitting there thinking, well, where am I going to find a laundromat that's open at 10 to dry my clothes? And then Marissa got up, and I realized that it was a 2-speaker meeting, and I didn't have to drive 80 miles an hour to get here. So anyway, I'm here, and you know what? It's just how my life is anyway. My life continues to be very unmanageable. Okay, and I like to think that it won't always be very unmanageable, but unfortunately, it's still quite unmanageable by me. And but that's okay. And most important thing I found is, I just if I have a good attitude and if it's not necessary for me to run the show or to have my own way, then I have a pretty nice life, no matter what. And I'll get to all that later. I'll tell you. This is nice. You don't have to be real smart or be a good example to speak if you're new. I'm living proof that anybody can, come up and speak, and so I'm a very average person. I have average kind of sobriety, and, I'm not everything I say is just my own opinion, and it's just something that we do. We all take turns sharing what it used to be like and what happened and what it's like now. What it used to be like, I'm not from California. I grew up in Pennsylvania in a little industrial town outside of Pittsburgh that the Almanac of American Politics calls a rural industrial slum. And but I grew up in the nice part of the rural industrial slum. Like my dad was an industrialist, and we had an okay house. And all I can tell you is that everything was like way normal. It was really like Ozzie and Harriet, where I just had there really isn't anything in my childhood, in my family that would, you would think would predispose me to alcoholism, and I will tell you a couple things about, like when the New York Times did an article about the little town in which I grew up, and then kind of made fun of it because there's no crime. It's like 11,000 people, and all the police do is when people have too much to drink, they take them home and put them to bed, and that's like all the crime there is. And there are 3 steel mills, and each steel mill had 4 plant gates, one for each direction of the compass, and each plant gate had 3 bars on the corners opposite the plant gates. So our little town of 9 or 11,000 people, as many lived there, we had about 45 taverns. which has to be like some kind of record for a town that size. And all these people were making money. And it was cheap. Like you could get a draft for 15 or 20 cents and a shot for 30 cents, and these people were making money. And so, when the mill whistles blew at 7 in the morning and 3 in the afternoon and 11 at night, everybody went back and forth from the bar to the plant, and I don't know when they ever went home, and that's where life happened in our little town. And my grandfather, who I loved, my grandfather was a Russian immigrant steelworker, and he always had a glow on, and I was named after him sort of appropriately, and he used to take us up to the bucket of blood, and my cousins and I would sit on the step outside while Grandpa went in to have a shooter, and sometimes Grandma would catch us, and we would say, oh, we've only been here 1 minute, Grandma. Grandpa just went in, and I've been covering up for alcoholics ever since, mostly myself, like I had an aunt that lived next door, another aunt that lived up the street, another aunt that lived down the street. My maternal grandparents lived 1 block away. My grandfather and my grandmother, he was the town doctor. He lived right across the bridge, all in walking distance. And I never knew where I was going to sleep. If I could sleep with my cousins here one night, and my cousins there another night, and it was just this wonderful this wonderful family. And we didn't have, as far as I know, any real alcoholism or any secrets. It was just way normal. But I'll tell you a couple things about my personality when I was little. One thing is I always felt different from everyone else somehow. Like that I was always waiting for my parents to tell me that I was adopted, or like I just felt like I was from another planet, kind of, And it's hard to explain it, but I think other alcoholics understand it. I just felt a little separate from and different then. And I always felt like all my friends were like better friends with each other than they were with me, And so I felt like just a little less than and different than and separate from. And I also was a very frightened kid. Like like whenever the school nurse came in and whispered something to the teacher, I was sure she was telling the teacher my parents were killed in a plane crash or something. I was just really this neurotic kid. We used to go away on vacations, and we would always have to come home a week early because I'd have this incessant pain in my side. And they even took my appendix out in hopes that we could go on vacations after that, but it didn't help very much. I would stay with my grandfather, and he had this great big house, and he'd have to leave in the middle of the night to go out and deliver a baby or go to the emergency room. It'd always be 5 minutes late because he'd have to drop me off first because I was way too scared at 12 years old to stay in his house, by myself. And you know how you sleep over at friends' houses, and I used to sleep over at my friend's house, but they'd always bring me home at 3 in the morning, throwing up, because just staying 2 doors down the street produced too much anxiety for me. So, I was like a scared kid. And so when I went to high school, and was sort of normal. I didn't drink yet or anything, and I was kind of like a social moron. I had horn-rimmed glasses and braces, and I ran around with the really cool guys, but I really wasn't one. I was like a Patsy Weber, or I was like a sidekick, you know what I mean? And so it came time to go away to college. It was kind of a painful, I was still waiting for my first date late into my high school career. So it was time to go away to college, and I talked to the guidance counselor, and I told her I wanted to go to school in Ohio. And the reason I wanted to go to school in Ohio was because you can drink at 18. You can drink beer at 18. And my brother went to school in Ohio, and then he went to law school in Ohio, and he had an illustrious career of going to school and drinking, and that sounded like fun to me. And so I went to school. The guidance counselor looked at me like I was crazy, but I did. I went to school in Ohio, and when I got there, I was like a complete basket case. I was really scared and struggled, but I did the first quarter. I did everything that you're supposed to do. I got good grades. I pledged a fraternity. I played sports. But like the second quarter I was there, well, actually it was like the spring of my freshman year. I was with a guy named Steve Strong, and we went into Reed's Bar, which was the college bar. And we sat down, and there was this lady, the barmaid. Her name was Eve, and she was a big buxom barmaid with platinum blonde hair, looked like she was from the Bronx, and she looked like an old stripper, and she was like, "What do you have?" And I knew I was going to get served, and I wasn't just going to get served, the low 3-2 beer either. And I said, "I'll have a shot." "Yeah, that's it, a shot." And she said, "A shot of what?" And I said, "A shot of gin, that's it, shot of gin." So she gave me a shot of gin. And this is not Tanqueray. I mean, this was like Old Cuyahoga or something famous. It's like made in Cleveland, all right? And so I drank it. I had about 10 of them, maybe even 15 of them. I know I had a lot, okay? And So we were out driving around, and this guy, he had a blue car, I'll never forget, and I was throwing up out of the car, and I was saying, isn't college, it was a real balmy night, and you could smell all the flowers blooming, and the stars were out, and I said, isn't life great, isn't college great, isn't everything wonderful, and you're the best friend I ever had, and I only knew this guy about a week, and I was euphoric. And see, the first time I'd ever been euphoric was when they took my appendix out, and they prepped you. In the old days, they used to prep you with really good stuff when you had surgery. It was almost worth having surgery for. And lots of Demerol and everything. And I remember telling the nurse, gee, you have beautiful teeth, and you have beautiful hair. And I told the doctor, I'd like to thank you for what you're going to do. You can just cut anything you like, and see, I wasn't scared. I didn't think that something bad was getting ready to happen. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the other shoe was getting ready to drop. I was comfy. I was finally normal like everybody else, and I didn't feel any different from anyone else. I felt the same as everyone else and just as worthy, and I felt like a kind of camaraderie. That's why I thought it was okay for me to tell the nurse what nice teeth she had and everything like that, among other things. So I was euphoric again, throwing up out of this car. And so the next night I was back on that bar stool again, and I was to squeeze 4 years of college in 8 years, and that's what I did. What happened is that my drinking progressed, like the book says. The book tells us people drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. I most certainly like the effect produced by alcohol. And when you stop and think about it, it was like I was born to be this. Do you know what I mean? Considering the culture, everybody in my family drank. The culture is a drinking culture. I couldn't wait to grow up until I could drink, and I was scared to death of everything and felt separate from everything. And then when I drank, I was great, And so should have been 8 to 5 or even money, to becoming an alcoholic. So as I went through college, the disease progressed, and I started to develop the characteristics of an alcoholic. One thing I had was a lot of self-pity. If anything bad ever happened, I was just poor me, and it was never my fault. It was it was always your fault or someone else's fault. Second thing, I became a liar. I was we have to lie. I used to tell the professor that the dog ate my paper, or, and I remember one time he asked me, how many grandmothers do you have? It was like the 5th time my grandmother died when I didn't show up for a test or something. And what happens after a while is I would just as soon lie as tell the truth, And so I felt sorry for myself. I blamed others for what was wrong with me. I was dishonest, and also I had seething resentments. And I forgot what it was like to have seething resentments until I started sponsoring new people in our program. And, seething resentment is when you just can't say the other person's name without spitting. And you say, how about Bob? Oh, Bob, that son of a bitch. And his spit comes out, and it's like sitting in the front row and Howard's speaking, and you're just like, okay, and I'm like, all right, it was pretty bad, so that's what happened, and I flunked out twice, got kicked out twice, I dropped out twice. It was a big mess, and finally, in like my 3rd senior year, I was watching television one day. I saw a George McGovern ad on television, and he reminded me of my dad, and my dad had passed away not long before, and he was saying, let's kick Richard Nixon out of office, and I thought, that's what's wrong with me. The country's this college campus is just a microcosm of the whole country, which is all screwed up, and I don't wonder I'm all screwed up. I should just go out and help change things, it's kind of a long way around to feel like you have to change the world in order to feel like you can live in it, and it's interesting that when Chuck Chamberlain wrote his book, this guy's supposed to know more about alcoholism than anybody, he could have named it a million things, but he named it a new pair of glasses, meaning, what we really change is the way we look at things. So I went off to work for George McGovern, and they sent me to Oregon. Well, I had never even been west of Ohio, And this was to begin like this odyssey for me of traveling around. From the time I was a little kid, I always just read as much Jack Kerouac and Jack London and Woody Guthrie and Bob Dylan as I could, and I I always wanted to be this person that rambled around hot freight trains or went to sea or whatever. And so I had a chance to travel around and see the country. And I always had this precious perception of our country and its people, and I got to do it firsthand. So I just became like this migrant community organizer. And I would just, it was really fun. And I still drank, but I didn't get too drunk too often. I was controlling and enjoying my drinking. I think a part of it was because I really liked what I was doing. And I felt like I was making a real contribution. And when we were always working for underdogs, you know, minority candidates and women candidates and candidates that didn't have any money, and you know, and I liked that. And so we're pretty good. I also became a champion freeloader, and which I think my karma is catching up with now. I've had a few newcomers stay at my house for a weekend that lasted a whole year, you know, and they dial the 976 sex lines, and you know, you get the bill and everything, you know. So I would just see what would happen is some guy he really liked Joe Smith that was running for governor, and as his contribution he would let this like hot shot organizer from out of state come and live at his house, and that would be his contribution to like Joe Smith's campaign or something, and that would be me, and I would come and eat everything in the guy's refrigerator and drink everything in his cupboard and go out with his daughter and walk his dog and everything, and I just moved right in. And it was really, in between campaigns, I would go back and stay with these people who I met all around the country, and it was really, really very fun. It was kind of like a drinking tour of America. And I would, when I was in the coal fields, I'd drink bourbon out of the bottle, and when I was in, you know, in the inner city, we'd mix a little wine with ginger ale, and then when I was working in Minnesota, never drink grain belt beer if you go back out. That could be the second worst thing that could happen to you, other than going out yourself. You get like a green around the gills when you have it. So that's sort of, and so it was fun. But what happened is, you know, the book tells us that our drinking progressed, and my drinking progressed, and things started getting worse, and stuff started happening to me. And one of the things, like I had this spectacular bicycle accident. I was in Virginia Beach, and I was riding my bike, and I smashed my head on the pavement. I was drunk, you know, and I had short-term memory loss and slurred speech, and nobody even noticed, because when you're boozed up all the time, you always have slurred speech. You can't remember anything anyway, you know. And then that was kind of bad. And then the other thing, I always tell this story. When I had this friend Henry, and Henry was running for governor of Virginia, and I was working for him, and he had, this was like a year away, and he had a favor. He wanted me to help him. He liked Jimmy Carter, right? I didn't like Jimmy Carter at the time. And he said, Jimmy Carter wants to have this rally in the coal fields, and he wants to have all the people from Virginia and West Virginia and Kentucky and Tennessee meet where the states come together and get like 50,000 people, and they're all, God knows, they're all good Democrats, they're coal miners and union people and everything. We have this big rally with fiddles and clogging and everything, and you're the perfect person because you've organized these people trust you and all this stuff, so fine. So he sent me out there, not knowing that I had slurred speech and short-term memory loss. I went out there, and so Jimmy Carter, we're waiting for the plane to land, and we didn't have any beer, and we had no beer, and the plane was really late, like 5 minutes late. So I sent James, the limousine driver, to get a six-pack. Well, of course, the plane landed right away, right? So I'm asking him, you know, how's Rosalind and how's Amy? And it's like, Peter, where's the car? I said, Governor, funny you should ask. And we had to rent a car for this guy to get him to the press conference and everything, and I wasn't even embarrassed. I mean, we were out of beer, and I mean, first of all, I didn't think he would ever become president. No one else I ever worked for ever won, you know. I mean, and after all, he's Billy's brother, right? He should have, you know. But so I blamed it on some other guy, Jim Gibbs. Yeah, it's all Jim's fault, you know. And so it was another disaster, and it got worse. And then I was in Manchester, New Hampshire in 1976, and this guy, his name was Fred Harrison. He was a senator from Oklahoma. He was really a nice man, and he asked me to be in charge of his New Hampshire primary. And I said, sure. He also, not knowing that I'm just completely nuts, all right? So I went up there, and we had more volunteers than Carter and Udall and all the other candidates. We had more volunteers than all of them put together, and we were staying in all this, like, what we called the barracks. It was like these half-renovated apartment buildings, and I was drinking a lot, and I was really sick. I had like a bad infection, you know, pneumonia or something, and And I mean, it was really bad. And he would say things to me like, yep, here, I'm sending old Will Gears coming up there. Will Gear, Grandpa and the Waltons, Will coming up there with our, we're going to really give the country. Hey, you're the fellow's going to give the country back to the people, just like Woody Guthrie said, and all this stuff, And I'm drunk, and So anyway. There's this guy, his name was Michael Federico. He's a kid from Rhode Island, and we were listening to the Bob Dylan Desire album, and we were drinking red wine. And we were drinking a lot of red wine, a lot, okay? The most I've ever drank in my life. And every time we'd finish off a big bottle of red wine, Michael would go out and get another one. And we were just talking to all these, horrific things that women had done to us, or we thought they had done to us. So the next morning, I'm sitting at my desk, and all of a sudden, the right side of my face gets numb, and the left side of my body gets numb, and I get really scared and really confused. I don't have a clue, They rushed me to the hospital, and I was to not work for about 3 years, and I was really sick. And whether I had, whether it was when I smashed my head on the bike path, or whether I had a stroke, or whether it was just plain old, maybe that right side of my brain was just saturated with alcohol, and it was just alcohol poisoning, or it was just some kind of, it was almost like this guy that was seeing me in New Hampshire said it was almost like shell shock. When you see somebody that came back from the Vietnam War, they were, that's how I was, just really tweaked, okay? And so I would just have to have Valium all the time, and I was just really crazy. So there was this girl that I was seeing, and she sort of rescued me and took care of me, and she was going to school at UCSB, so she brought me to Santa Barbara so that I could recover, and every time I drank something, I would get deathly ill. I could have just a half a beer, and I would get deathly ill, so that was the end of my drinking. But what I did was I worked at getting my tolerance back so that I could drink a little more, and finally I got to the point where I could drink 3 or 4 beers without getting sick. I mean, who else but an alcoholic would try to increase your tolerance when obviously alcohol makes you so sick? I didn't want to not have it, because I didn't know how to live without it. So after a while, I got better, and I thought, that I was too important for Santa Barbara. So I moved to San Francisco, and I got 2 jobs. I got a job as a firefighter for the city, and also running an animal welfare agency. And for alcoholics and Al-Anons, we're good rescuers. So by rescuing, dogs and cats all day and people all night, I really liked what I was doing. And I was going to school at USF, and I was getting good grades, and I seemed to be controlling, enjoying my drinking, and it seemed like I was doing okay. And then comes the part of the story where my friend Art always used to make the sign of the cross. I met this girl, and she came to work at this animal welfare agency where I was, and she was going to school at Cal, and I was goofy over this person. It was like an affliction. If I never felt like that for the rest of my life, it would be okay with me, and to this day, I still have problems, I don't do relationships very well. I have a few dates in sobriety, and, the only time I get to hold their hand is during the Lord's Prayer, and sometimes I'm, dropped off at a slow roll, so, it isn't like the thing I do really great, but it's like this combination of, jealousy and fear and self-consciousness, but anyway, that's certainly how I was then. So anyway, this girl didn't want to see me anymore, and I really couldn't really understand that. And we were about the same age. She was 18 and I was 30, and so it was pretty bad. Her father was president of the American Psychiatric Association, and he taught in the School of Medicine at Stanford, and so I would stake out her house as he was bringing her home and call the guy up drunk in the middle of the night, and he wasn't a very good psychiatrist. He would just hang up on me, and it was really bad. I would go into a bar. Well, I went down to Sunnyvale where they have, George Jones on the jukebox. If drinking don't kill me or memory will, and songs like that. And just to get drunk at her, just to get drunk at her. And I stayed drunk for 2 years. I didn't mean to stay drunk for 2 years. I was a really big drunk. And it was the beginning of the end. I lost both of my jobs. I was kicked out of school. I ended up living outside. There was, by Stanford University, there's all these bars, and all the bartenders sell alcohol, and they also sell cocaine, which is like an integral part of your job when you're a bartender there. And they all, no matter what bar they worked in, they all lived in the same old house that looked like a haunted house, and that's where I lived, on the floor of this house, with a dog named Bob, a shaggy dog named Bob. And every night these guys would come home at 3 o'clock after the bar closed, and they'd bring a couple of cases of beer home and drugs and stuff, and I would, drink and use and try and go to sleep. And then in the morning, I'd wake up and I'd be on the floor there with Bob, and of course people would be scattered all over the place. And I would say to myself, well, I better get up because I'm a little bit wired from, snorting that cocaine. So I would get up, but then I would be so wired, I would be so tired from partying all night, I'd feel like I needed to lay down. So I would lay down, but then I would realize I was too wired to lay down, so I would get up. So while I'm up, so it's kind of like this place between being awake and being asleep. And I would look out, and all these little Mercedes and BMWs all in Silicon Valley, everybody was going to work. And so I would try to find a cigarette butt. And of course, when people snort cocaine all night, there are no cigarette butts, just the little ones, And I'd take a puff and I'd gag right away, because your gag reflex isn't so good when you're hungover, plus a butt's so strong when they're little. And then I'd try to find a can of beer that didn't have a butt floating in it to finish, and I'd start going through everybody's pants pockets to see if I could find some change to get a beer, and they'd think, oh, that's probably just Pete going through our pants pockets. I'd hear the jingling, and it'd start all over. And I mean, I would gladly be dead than to be like that again. That's how I lived. And I was a big joke. This animal welfare agency was called Pets in Need, and they used to call me Pete's in Need. And they'd see me coming down the street, and people would just run across the street, and because they knew I was going to tell them how hard I had it, or to borrow some money, or burn them in a drug deal or something. I was just pathetic, and I would go into a bar, and this girl, she was a 4-point student at Cal and all this stuff, but she also had another life. She was like, she'd be leaving the bar with a coke dealer at night, and I said, oh, you're not leaving with that guy? And the guy would slug me, and it was pathetic. And I ended up in Santa Cruz. I was completely homeless. I lived outside. I begged for food at the back door of restaurants. I ate in a soup kitchen, and that's sort of where I ended up. I came to Santa Monica because my cousin Amy thought she might be able to help me, and it was a nightmare for her. While my dogs dug up her backyard, I drank everything in her house, and every day I would go and look for a job. And I would really mean to look for a job, and I was scared. I knew I was drinking against my will. And the book tells us that we have no defense against the first drink, And you know how it tells us that we know that drinking is injurious, and we know we shouldn't even have one drink, but we see other people drinking with impunity, so we take a drink, and then the phenomenon of craving occurs. We pass through the well-known stages of a spree, and we emerge remorseful, never to do it again. And then, of course, we do it again. And that's how I was living. And if you gave me a lie detector in the test in the morning, it would show that I really fully intended to go find a job that day, but I just couldn't get past the first bar. And it was really scary. I couldn't stop drinking. And one time, my cousin went to San Diego for the weekend, for Easter in 1983, and my mom had sent me $1,000 to move out of my cousin's house. And my cousin thought that God had sent that $1,000, And so I started thinking to myself, I wouldn't need this whole $1,000 to move out of my cousin's house. So I had a little party, and I got my drug of choice, which was Tanqueray gin, and then I got some cocaine, and I got a couple of dates out of the Yellow Pages, and in the morning there wasn't even a nickel left of that $1,000, not a nickel, and oh boy, my cousin was coming home, and some of the stuff was missing from her house, and I was in so much. I thought, I'm in the most trouble I've ever been in my life. And I went into the bathroom to throw up because I had the worst hangover I ever had. It was all blood. I just threw up nothing but blood, and I saw everything. My mom, my dad. I was this altruistic kid that everybody loved, and I loved everyone. And I was going to take my grandfather's. My grandfather delivered me, and he named me, and I was going to have his medical practice after him, and no one would have ever guessed. There I was just dying. I was a street drunk. I was a public inebriate, and I saw everything. I got down on my knees, and I asked God to help me, and I called AA Central Office, and Jim Barracks came out and got me, and he took me to the Marina Center, and they took me upstairs. There was a restaurant there. They bought me a big book. They bought me dinner. During the meeting, I listened. When we were holding hands and saying the Lord's Prayer, I started to cry, and I knew I was all done. I've never even had any craving or thought, it's been almost 11 years, and I really haven't ever wanted to drink or use again. It's really amazing. And I think a lot of it is I had such a low bottom. Like when the book tells us we have to be badly mangled, and I was really badly mangled. And I was really crazy and sick. When I came in, I was very scared. I was very hurt. And Geez, I stayed at my cousin's for a couple more months. Ronnie Weber was my sponsor. He made me have 7 commitments. I have a commitment every night, everywhere. I got these jobs at newcomer. I met a guy at a meeting. He was a tree trimmer, but he was there in a court card. I had to meet him at the laundromat. He had these prostitutes with him they were all drunk, and I would have to the prostitutes rake the leaves, and my job was to take them to the methadone clinic at noon, and my cousin was mad because I quit that job. Then I got a boiler room job. Hello, Mr. Smith, how are you? How's everything in Fort Lauderdale today? I called you last week and you were really busy, but you said if we ever had a sale to call you back. Well, everything is 80% off. Are those the Bics or are those the Papermates? You know what I mean? All the jobs you have when you're new. My cousin wasn't very impressed. I didn't find it necessary to drink, but I didn't find it necessary to work very much, and she kicked me. She brought my aunt from Pennsylvania, Big Helen, to kick me out of her house. And Ronnie came and got me, took me over to the Claire Foundation. And I went in and got down on my knees in the bathroom and asked God for them to take me in because I didn't want to be homeless again. And there was a man named Arthur East, and he said, Art was a guy who was 75 years old. He was very dapper looking, always jingled his keys. And he said, well, if you want to know, you might as well know where the coffee is if you're going to live here. And I lived on the sofa there for 2 months until they had a bed. And every morning, Art came in at 5:30, and he taught me everything. He taught me almost everything I know about life. And, I have this St. Bernard, his name is Thumper. He was getting abandoned out from the Marina Center 3 years ago as a puppy, and I took him home, and everywhere I go, Thumper goes. To this day, when I stop, I feel his nose in the back of my leg. I mean, and I get into bed, and he's right. There's no getting rid of him, and it's like I'm all Thumper has in the world. Well, Art was all I had in the world, and thank God I latched on to the right person. Wherever he went, when he went to the bookie, I went to the bookie. When he went to the step meeting, I went to the step meeting. Wherever he went, I went. He said, you need a car, and he gave me his mother-in-law's car. He said, you need a job. He got me a job in a liquor store down at the Marina City Club. Then after I worked there for a few months, you need a better job. He conned Ken Schoenlein to hire me to be in charge of public relations and fundraising for Claire Foundation, and all this stuff, and he was just wonderful. One time I ran out of gas. Twice I ran out of gas in the middle of the night with no money, and he came out at 79 years old with a gas can, and I'd be all embarrassed and say, well, that's what friends are for. He was so proud of me. Once I got a mayor's commendation from the city of Santa Monica for community service, and he was so proud of me. And so I wanted to be like him. I rented this house down on Hawthorne, and I started taking all these newcomers in, wall-to-wall newcomers. And, they would catch the place on fire and burglarize the neighbors. And we had a lot of psychiatric emergencies. I used to take them over to Robert Kennedy Hospital, and they would make me belts, all these belts. So Art was in Santa Monica Hospital, and he called me, and he said, the nurses don't know how to fix my pillows. You need to fix my pillows. And I'd come, and I'd put 2 behind him this way and 2 in front of him that way, and then he would be fine. And only Pete knows how to fix my pillows. And this guy had helped thousands of people, just like he helped me. And one day, near the end, he said to me, you're my best friend. And that was what a wonderful compliment, And anyway, when he died, I was with him, and this little street drunk named Kenny was with him, who was sober at the time. And Kenny later died on my front lawn of this disease. I read the eulogy at his funeral. It was a big funeral at St. Paul's Church in Westwood, and I think he would have been proud of me, And that's the kind of stuff we get to do sober. I have so many rich. I wrote an inventory. I read it to my sponsor, Howard, up in the Marina Center upstairs. And I wrote a book. Poor guy. He thought we were going to the meeting that night. He's barely made it to the meeting the next morning, and he'd be nah. What'd you say? I'd say, well, I slept with his wife. Yeah, don't do that again. No. And he'd go on and nod again, And he's been such a wonderful sponsor for me. I'm so lucky. A very lucky person. I made my amends. I used to say the 3rd step prayer over and over again forever. I love that. I made my amends. I had a huge list of hundreds of people on my amends list. I harmed a lot of people. I've been able to make amends to most of them, thank God. It's taken me a long time. I made amends to my friend whose wedding I wrecked in Oregon. I really wrecked it. Everybody has a big one that you're scared to make. I thought they would shoot me if I ever came. The priest was crying. I mean, they had the sheriff's deputies there. So, I had to go up there and tell them, hey, Sorry I wrecked your wedding. No, so I found them. I was really scared. And the first thing my friend's wife did, she came up to me and hugged me, and she said, when are you going to come and stay with us again? And she really meant it, too. And I made amends to 2 uncles that I owed money to, and they both passed away since, and we all cried when I did that. And it's really been something. You know, I wouldn't have the sense to do all this stuff if it wasn't for the steps of this program. So anyway, I've had all kinds of experiences in AA. I mean, when I was new, I was just thrown into, you know, like over at Claire, it's not very long when you go from being the helper, from the helpee to the helper, you know, and I would show up before the Board of Supervisors and talk about how, you know, we need to have more money for the West Side, or how the needs assessment isn't done properly, and they don't count the alcohol-related death data properly in the West Health District. I mean, I just had booze on my breath 5 days ago, you know, and it was wonderful to be thrown in back into society like that. I was on the board of directors of a lot of community agencies and taught CPR, and we still take people into our house and dogs into our house. And been on the wrong track a lot of times in sobriety. I used to try to fix other people and get involved in other people's lives, you know, and I used to hold myself up as somebody that knew more than everyone else. I used to have about 8 or 9 guys I sponsored to my house every Wednesday night to the do as I say and not as I do meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And, you know, and I would, you know, I don't do that anymore, you know, and I really mind my own business. I just think it's so important. And I don't, you know, if you don't pay a lot of attention to what someone else is doing and start judging what they're doing, you're not going to be very resentful very often, you know. And I'm a real mind my own business person, and I ask God every morning. Every morning I go out in my backyard and I pray and meditate, and and I ask God to help me to mind my own business today, except for people who need my help, and it really works great. I find real peace that way. And I've been on the wrong track a lot. You know, I thought if I made a lot of money, it would make me happy. Didn't make me happy. I thought if I found the best girlfriend in the world, I mean, you know, not all the stuff that I thought would fix me didn't do anything except maybe made things worse, actually. Only thing that's ever really helped me in sobriety is working the steps of AA, working with others, and keeping my priorities straight, which really means making peace of mind be my highest priority. My highest priority today is my peace of mind, my spiritual condition, if you will. That's my highest priority. If I chase anything else, you know, it doesn't work. And I mean, I felt like the greyhounds whenever they finally found out that the rabbit's made out of metal or something. And I was like, oh my God, I've been chasing the wrong thing all these 10 years of sobriety. And so I also know that attitude has a lot to do with everything. And I'm going to sit down in 2 minutes. You know, it's really important for me to have a loving and patient attitude and a hopeful attitude. I know that I'm going to be taken care of. I know that there's a loving God that's going to take care of me, and I know that you all mean well and you're all doing the best that you can, and to have a good attitude every day. You know, when I start my day out with a good attitude, I have a great day. And when I start my day out with, you know, everybody's out to get me, pour me attitude, then I have a terrible day, you know, and I have to remember that. So I'll just tell you a quick story and then I'll sit down. When I was in Santa Cruz, I was living at the St. George Hotel, which was probably a luxury hotel at one time before they shot Lincoln or something, but at this point in time, it was a hotel where the Salvation Army and the Red Cross pays your way to stay there. And my next door neighbor was a guy named Richard, who looked like Charles Manson. He had a big beard and was scary. And Richard used to let me watch him shoot up, which I thought was so interesting. And he had coffee, which no one ever had coffee. And so we would be able to make with hot water coffee and peanut butter, and that's great when you're on the bum. And the bathroom was down the hall, and the whole building tilted, and you'd have to walk like this down. If you put an orange on the floor, just went to the side. And I was begging for food at the back door of this restaurant, and this guy gave me a job as a dishwasher. And his name was Ron Keyes, and I'll never forget him. He's one of the brightest people I've ever met. He could play any musical instrument made. He could impersonate anybody better than Rich Little or Dana Carvey. The guy was a genius, and he was an alcoholic like me. He drank a couple of fifths a day. He really did. So he let me sleep on the floor of his room in this house he rented a room in a house, and he let me sleep on the floor of the room that he rented. And one day he told me, Pete, I'm running away with Katie the waitress, and you can have the room. Oh, I can have the room, I thought. And he took off with Katie, the waitress, and went to somewhere far away, Florida or something. And his wife lived in another part of Santa Cruz with 4 children, and at the same time she put the 4 children, 2 12-year-old girls, twin, tall blonde girls, 12 years old, Sabrina and Karina, and a 5-year-old boy and a 6-year-old girl, put them in a taxi with a trunk of clothes, $100 worth of food stamps, and say, "You take care of them this for a while, you son of a bitch," and sent the taxi over to the house where I had recently inherited the room an hour before. And she took off for Colorado. So there I was, hideously addicted to alcohol and drugs with these 4 little children. And I was just, I was completely tweaked. This girl, Amy, that I was so goofed up over, I would be talking to her. I'd be saying, "I knew you weren't with your mother that night," you know what I mean? I hadn't seen this girl for 2 years, and they would come up to me, "What's wrong?" Because I would be like way tortured, and I'd say, "Oh, nothing," but kids are really smart, and those kids, I think I would have gone crazy if it wasn't for them. I don't know how long I had them. It was a few weeks. And every night we read The Wizard of Oz. Wizard of Oz, Wizard of Oz, Wizard of Oz. And then I would get them all off to school in the morning, and the 2 twins, they would roller skate on the boardwalk and say they were orphans, and they would panhandle money, and then I would drink on them so that I could have money to drink on. So anyway, the mother came back, and one of the twins, her name was Sabrina, she said, "Well, guess this is it." I go, "Yeah." And she said, "Don't cry." I said, "No, I'm not going to cry," but I knew I would. And she said, "I love you." And I said, "I love you too." And she said, "I hope you find your way to Oz." And I always remember that. And I always think of when I came into the doors of AA that I really did it in my own way. And I hope I keep coming back, and I hope you keep coming back. And I thank you very much for enduring my talk.
Sorry to interrupt your viewing. Taper Dave here. Just wanted to take a second to ask you to like and subscribe to my channel. Let me know if you like what you're listening. I've got some very good talks here, and this one's a great one. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Tell me what you think. Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right, but I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.